This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. We are about to present famed Harvard law professor, constitutional scholar Alan Dershowitz with his greatest intellectual challenge. Greatest intellectual challenge he's ever faced.
What's that?
Matching constitutional wits with Nancy Pelosi. Who yesterday...
Who will prevail?
Yesterday, Nancy Pelosi, in an interview with a television station in San Francisco, Pelosiville, had this to say about her advocacy that the National Park Service deny permits for gatherings of alt-right persons.
How could the Park Service justify denying that organization their free speech rights?
Because the Constitution does not say that a person can yell wolf in a crowded theater. If you are endangering people, then you don't have a constitutional right to do that.
Was she thinking like crying wolf?
Well, I don't know. Is she that? Yes, the former speaker who cried wolf. She is technically correct. The Constitution does not say you can cry wolf in a crowded theater. So technically that is true. It does not say that anywhere.
It doesn't. You're
no.
right.
I don't think that's exactly what Oliver Wendell Holmes had intended, but okay. Now, on the flip side, these are different venues, if you will, because the Cloudflare CEO, who wrote a piece earlier this week in the Wall Street Journal about taking down this neo-Nazi website. Cloudflare's a big internet networking company, not a household name, but they got a lot of power. And after they took down this neo-Nazi website, effectively, the Cloudflare CEO had some pangs of reflection about it and about where the lines are. And he offered this in an interview, even though, again, this is a private marketplace versus the National Park Service, public space, different standards, but it's part of the discussion regardless. Listen to Cloudflare CEO.
Do you have too much power?
What we need to have is a conversation about where is it the right place for tech companies to be regulating the internet. And what I know is not the right answer is that a cabal of 10 tech executives are the ones choosing what content goes online and what content doesn't go online.
All right. Well, that should have given Professor Dershowitz enough time to shepherdize the Schenck case. We're pleased to be joined again by Alan Dershowitz, former Harvard Law School professor, constitutional law expert. Professor Dershowitz, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. I didn't have to shepherd Schenck because I actually wrote a book about it called Shouting Fire, which is, of course, the phrase that Justice Holmes used, and he talked about it doing it in a crowded theater, not an open national park. Nancy Pelosi is just dead wrong as a matter of constitutional law. Once you start limiting speech because it might endanger somebody, then we have to stop selling Karl Marx's books, stop selling the Bible. Probably more people were killed in the name of the Bible and the Quran than any other books together. You would have to have prevented Martin Luther King from walking through the streets of Birmingham, Alabama. It's just impossible to draw the kind of line that she wants to draw politically. She doesn't like the alt-right. I don't like the alt-right either. I don't like the alt-left either. I don't like organizations like Antifa, which use violence to try to stop violence. But once you start censoring one side, we have what we call the circle of civility. You have to have equal application. You can't, on public universities or in public parks, say we don't like the right, but we like the left. I remember Woody Allen and Annie Hall saying, I'm a bigot, but I'm a bigot for the left. And that's not the way the Constitution works. You have to allow bigotry left and right under the First Amendment. I've just written a book which deals with a lot of these issues. It's called Trumped Up.
Oh.
Appropriate title, Trumped Up, how the criminalization of political differences endangers democracy. And it's all about Nancy Pelosi crying wolf, because she shouts wolf every time that President Trump does something she disagrees with, and that's very often. He does things that I disagree with very often. But she yells, crime, crime, impeach every time he does something wrong.
Well, please send her the audio version of that because she's not much of a reader. Here.
Well, I like her as a person, but I think that she's such a partisan zealot that she puts partisan zealotry before constitutional interpretation and often before common sense.
Well, here's the follow-up question then, particularly per the nature of your forthcoming book, and that is just setting aside the constitutional protections for a second. How concerned are you culturally about this idea that if I disagree with someone or if I find something objectionable, they should be silenced, that content should be banned?
Well, that's what they're teaching students at universities today all over the country. At Berkeley, if you don't like a speaker, you engage in violence, shut them down. I have been shut down on 3 occasions. They tried. I come from Brooklyn, so I just shouted over them. But at University of California, Irvine, anti-Israel students tried to stop me from advocating a 2-state solution. At the University of Massachusetts, the same thing happened, and they succeeded. They actually cut my speech short. And at, of all places, Johns Hopkins, there was an attempt to prevent me from speaking. They said I was harassing the students before I ever spoke by not admitting that Israel commits war crimes. So they were going to tell me what to say, and they didn't want to listen to my point of view. And by the way, this is not only getting the support of radical student groups, it's getting the support of radical faculty. And there are enough of them, and they speak loudly enough, that they coerce the universities into going along with their censorial attitudes. And what we're getting are attitudes on campuses today that are so antagonistic to diversity. This is done in the name of diversity, the phoniest word ever used on university campuses. University campuses do not want diversity of points of view. They want diversity of skin color. They want diversity of ethnicity, sure, of gender. But the last thing they want is diversity of points of view. When's the last time you saw universities trying to get more fundamentalist Christian students, more students who belong to the National Rifle Association, more students who advocate very conservative views on campus? They don't want intellectual diversity. They just want diversity of person, not of ideas.
And the problem is, where does this censorship end? I mean, if every time we disagree with a group, we shut off their voices, that's really no way to live.
Well, it's no way to live. And, of course, everybody loves freedom of speech except for one thing. When you ask many, many Jews, they say, oh, we love freedom of speech, but Holocaust denial? No, that's not freedom of speech. When you ask some African-American students, they say, oh, we love freedom of speech, but not for racism. When you ask some feminists, oh, we love freedom of speech, but pornography? Oh, my God. No, some Muslim students, oh, we love freedom of speech, but if you put down Islam or Muhammad, forget about it. So everybody wants one exception. And if you start adding up all the exceptions, you eliminated the First Amendment for any kind of controversial speech.
I've tried to, we try to highlight on this show some on the left. I mean, I'm conservative, but highlight some on the left, including academics that are standing up to call out this totalitarianism on campus when it manifests itself. Frank Rich did after the Middlebury incident where that professor was assaulted. We spoke earlier this week with Mark Lilla, who's got a new book out about small L liberalism as well as capital L liberalism. And the path there, and he's critical of the same kind of things that you're critical of. But do you see on the left, at least, any movement away from these examples that you've experienced on college campuses at Evergreen State, at Berkeley, at Middlebury, and on and on and on? Yeah. Is there a recognition of the danger that is not too far down the road and a change in behavior or attitude as a result?
There is a silent recognition, but if people speak out, they immediately are branded as racist. And that's what happened at Evergreen University. They're immediately branded as racist. And the one thing faculty members don't want is to be branded as racist. After 50 years of teaching at Harvard and a number of other places, I've never seen a less courageous group of people in general than tenured university professors. The last thing they want to do is alienate the most radical elements of their student body, because they would be then boycotted, picketed, regarded as pariahs, called racist. And they don't want to do that, and they don't want to incur that kind of wrath. So you get a lot of silence. discussion of it at faculty lunches, but you don't get public disclaimers.
And it's interesting, particularly in the light of this piece in the New York Times yesterday. Even with affirmative action, Black and Hispanics are more underrepresented at top colleges than 35 years ago, starting with the Ivy League colleges.
Well, I don't like the term underrepresented.
Well, okay, but I'm just the New York Times.
Represented in proportion to its numbers. That's what they used to have in Russia. It was called the numerus clausus, the quota system. And there are some people who are pushing for that. But
this is the
21% representation.
No,
this and that. Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you, Professor, but I'm saying this is the standard by which they measure themselves.
Yeah, no, I agree. And look, Harvard, for the first time in its history, this entering class in 2017 will have a minority of white students. It will have a majority of people of color. That, of course, includes Asian Americans, who are the most discriminated against group in all of academia today. Today, the only group of students who systematically get turned down from major universities with perfect SAT scores and perfect academic records in high school, the only ones who get turned down now are Asian Americans, because people are afraid that a tipping point will be reached, that if you took at MIT, for example, only students based on grades and records, you'd have perhaps even a majority of Asian American students, because today they are the students who work so hard, who have many of them, I'm stereotyping, and there are differences, of course, but the work ethic is so incredibly great among Asian American students that they do extraordinarily well on standard tests. And so schools have to impose, in effect, quotas. Now, there's a big difference between ceiling quotas and floor quotas. Many schools have floor quotas. We want at least 13% African Americans. That's very different from we don't want more than 20% Asian Americans. Ceilings and floors are quite different.
I wanted to get your take on something else that CNN did this week. What they've essentially done is, in my opinion, is resuscitate Hannah Arendt's banality of evil argument in her Eichmann in Jerusalem work.
One of the dumbest phrases ever used in all of literature. Hannah Arendt was a horrible, horrible woman. As you know, she had an affair with Martin Heidegger, who was a complete fervent Nazi, and the least banal of men. So for her to construct this phrase, the banality of evil, she hardly even went to the trial at all of Eichmann. I know that because my friend Telfer Taylor, who was the chief prosecutor at Nuremberg and who covered the trial for American media, said he never saw her there. She was never there. She came to Jerusalem in order to write a book about the banality of evil before she ever met Eichmann. Eichmann was not a banal man. He was a very, very brilliant man. The success of Nazism was not banality. It's that they got university students to support them. They got
exactly.
They got Furtwängler. They got the leading intellectuals of the day to support them. And she invented this phrase, the banality of evil, which is the most misleading, horrible term that totally mischaracterizes how Nazism came to be and how the Holocaust came to be.
Well, I appreciate that context because now it's being updated. It's not, the phrase wasn't used, but the argument is being used. CNN featuring a Fordham law professor saying we're a country with a few million passionate white supremacists and tens of millions of white supremacists by default. That was the twisted formula that made the Holocaust and Rwanda possible and allowed Jim Crow segregation to survive. Nice people look the other way while those with an appetite for violence did the dirty work. You have to have millions of people who are willing to be bystanders who push aside evidence of racism, Islamophobia, or sexism. You can't have one without the other, and this professor is talking about Trump voters.
Yeah, and of course he never mentions anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism or a double standard toward Israel or a double standard toward Jews on university campuses. There are certain selected groups today under intersectionality which get all the attention, and these are generalizations that themselves have implicit racism within them, generalizing about white privilege, generalizing about the white community, generalizing about Jews, generalizing about Catholics, generalizing about Christians in general, is another form of bigotry, and it has to be fought. I don't think today in America we have a real, clear and present danger from the alt-right because they're rejected university. They lost in Charlottesville. Everybody hates them. Everybody condemns them. But not too many people are condemning the hard left, Antifa, and some other organizations like that. And I wrote a piece that appeared this week saying, yes, President Trump had a special obligation to condemn the hard right because they speak in his name falsely, but they claim they're doing it in his name. I quote David Duke, I quote Spencer, all those people. And liberals like me, we have an obligation to speak out about the hard left because they speak in the name of liberalism, and they're not liberals. They're anti-liberals. So I think both sides, centrist liberals have an obligation to speak out against the hard left, and centrist conservatives against the hard right. The way was led by William F. Buckley,
yes,
who condemned Pat Buchanan for his anti-Semitism back in the 1990s. And because he was a centrist conservative, his condemnation carried great weight, and it helped the conservative movement rid itself and marginalize that wing, which included bigots, anti-Semites, racists, and others. And the conservative movement thrived as the result of that. We have to do the same thing with liberalism today.
He is Professor Alan Dershowitz, famed Harvard law professor, constitutional scholar. The forthcoming book, Trumped Up, Professor?
Yes, Trumped Up, How the Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. It's a quick ebook and soft cover, so you can only get it on Amazon. It's not in stores, but just press one button on Amazon. They'll either ship it to you, or you can read it on Kindle. It's a quick read. It's 200 pages. It's very current. It's all about the attempts to turn political differences between Democrats and Trump into alleged crimes and impeachable conduct, which I'm against. Even though I voted strongly for Hillary Clinton and I'm a liberal Democrat, I don't like the idea of turning everything into crimes.
All right, we're still working on you. Professor Dershowitz, thanks so much for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.